We've been talking about where this men's basketball team may be heading, but I think it's time we start talking about how they got here.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers can join today and get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. Kenton, as I mentioned in the intro here, we've been talking a lot about what's been going on with men's basketball as we review each game, what's been going on within the game and where they might be going toward the end of the season. But maybe we should rewind a little bit and diagnose how exactly they have found themselves in the position that they are currently in. So we both had this idea that we would be discussing the top three things that have gone wrong for Kevin Keats' squad here. Kenton, I'll let you go first. Give me your top thing that has gone wrong for this team.
I think that it's the lack of player development or player regression. That is, to me, the biggest, most glaring problem that this team faces. How many players, and Grayson and I looked this up, how many players are playing at exactly the level they were last year or better in terms of points per game, field goal percentage, and or three-point field goal percentage if they're in the backcourt? We have a whopping one.
And you could probably guess who that one is as well.
It's DJ Horn. And as the old song goes, one is the loneliest number there could ever be. You know why? Because you need more guys that are getting better or at least maintaining who they were. How many guys have we seen take a step back from last year where you're like, what happened? What was coached out of you or into you that has broken your jump shot? What has been coached out of you or into you that gives you an inability to function in the post? What has been coached out of you or into you that just you aren't the same player you were at your last stop, even though you're playing more minutes? The fact of the matter is simple. If these players are developing, people always talk about, oh, Keats doesn't have a system and that, no system this, no system that. I'll give you the greatest example of no system, and he just makes it work. Say what you want about the man off the court. Say what you want about him as a man. Last time I checked, Rick Pitino isn't known for having these crazy elaborate offensive sets. He has guys that he says, hey, we're going to play extremely tough defense, which this NC State team does do. They play good defense. I'll give them that. They play tough defense, and they say offensively, just don't take any crazy shots, and we'll be all right. And I'm pretty sure he won a natty like that or got close multiple times. We do not have players at the moment, or we're coaching something into these players at the moment that is fundamentally breaking their offensive abilities, that when they come in or when they develop into something, all of a sudden, and maybe it's just this year. Maybe it's just this year. Maybe it's not a coaching thing. Maybe it's not these players thing. Maybe it's just this year in particular. But what I'm seeing is players are not taking steps forward. And I want you to imagine how different would the season be if DJ Burns takes a step forward. How different takes a step forward from last year. How different would this year be if Casey Morcell takes a step forward from last year? How different would this year be if the Ben Middlebrooks we saw at Clemson, he just added one or two post moves that he's committed to memory, that he can work it as much as he wants, whenever he wants, and defenses are going to have a problem stopping it. What would we be looking at? Instead, we're seeing a bunch of guys that I think are either playing at the best you can hope for in this team is that they play at the level they did last year, because there are multiple players that have slid back a tier. And that's my biggest problem. or the biggest thing I see wrong with this team.
Yeah, so yours is talking about maybe the lack of shooting. Mine is talking about the lack of shooters. And that can connect to recruiting in some aspects. It probably in large part connects to player development, like you mentioned there, Kenton. But my number one point here is that the shooting, as we all know, has not been there. Outside of DJ Horn, of course. DJ Horn has been phenomenal, elite, maybe even. He's shooting 43% in totality and 43% from deep. That is a fantastic season, all while averaging, I believe he's nearly at 17 points a game now because he's leading the way. And we've talked about the inconsistencies from everyone else. Again, I'm not trying to throw stones here, but you look at Jaden Taylor, 37% field goal shooting, 30% from deep. Casey Morsell, 41% field goal shooting, 29% from deep. And I think that is the biggest number that really stings when that one comes out. 29% from deep from Casey Morsell. It does make a glaring difference. I think you alluded to that. Imagine this season with a Casey Morsell shooting, let's say like 35%, which is not a crazy difference, at least on paper. But I would bet that makes a considerable difference in multiple basketball games. And I've said this already before, but sometimes it's a bounce. I think a lot of times in this season in particular, it's even leaked into the confidence. You saw several games where Casey Morsell just wasn't taking shots. He would pass up an open look and then pass to someone else, basically saying, okay, well, I don't feel comfortable taking this shot at this moment. I need somebody else to take this ball and do something with it. And I think you saw some of that from Jaden Taylor as well. I think he was a little trigger happy, and then he got gun shy. It's just it's a teeter-totter, a seesaw, seemingly every single game. Who else can possibly step up and help DJ Horn? And there's just never enough consistent answers. So my top thing that has gone wrong, of course, is the lack of shooters. And if you do want to open a deeper discussion about the recruiting, maybe you could say that there has been some recruiting misses for this year in particular. I mean, you look at a guy like Cam Woods, we're hoping he would come in and make a difference when it comes to shooting. I know he was ineligible for a portion of the season, and then he played and is now not playing. Just a weird situation there. Of course, MJ Rice decides to redshirt. That's out of everyone's control. So that kind of is what it is. But the lack of shooters has sorely hurt this team. And so that is, on paper, that's the first thing that jumps off for me.
We talk about players being a new person or who they are now. You talk about the shooting ability. This is a make or miss game, period. If the defense plays perfectly, but you just so happen to hit the shot, then guess what? That is, in effect, the same result as if the defense had left you wide open and said, hey, he's self-checked past half court and was like, we don't really need to take him seriously, and you hit a three. It's the exact same thing. So we're seeing too many situations where, the trade ball isn't falling. And I do feel like when you look at what you had last year, I can see why you didn't recruit a ton of shooting. I get it. I can see why, if you're imagining, hey, we'll have a player that we can roll the ball out to, and he gets it multiple ways in DJ Horn, who's also going to be a three-point striker. And we're going to have Casey Morsell being a three-point striker. And we're going to have Jaden Taylor take the next step as a shooter. He'll be a three-point striker. Now you're looking at a situation where you're like, oh, man, we've got guys who can knock it down all over the place. Maybe Michael O'Connell, throw him in there too and say he kicks it up a level. Not saying that these guys all become 40 to 45% shooters, but 35%. If these guys are averaging 30, 33, 35% between all of them, we win many more games than we do. We just haven't. So I think that the things we're talking about here are intertwined in terms of they're not shooting because they're not developing positively in terms of their shooting rhythm and stroke.
Most of these reasons are very intertwined. A lot of times one will lead into the other. And so in just a moment, we'll get into our second and third reason. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Our first Tuesday sponsor is FanDuel. The wait is almost over for our state of North Carolina. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, is coming to our state. On March 11th, we will finally be able to bet on all of our favorite teams in all of our favorite sports. With FanDuel, there's tons of ways for us to get in on the action. We can bet on anything from the money line to over-unders to which teams will make a little noise in March Madness. And this all comes on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, with live betting, you can even pick which player will put up the next basket or maybe even a three-pointer and the one after that. See for yourself why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon so you can be the first to know when FanDuel goes live in North Carolina. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Middle portion of our Tuesday show, continuing this discussion about our top 3 things that have gotten men's basketball to this point in this season. Kenton, I'm going to kick it back to you. What is your second point for things that have gone wrong?
The second point that I look at, there has just been entirely too many slow starts.
Yeah.
This team plays as if they have something better to do in the first half than be locked in for a basketball game. And then in the second half, they're like, oh, man, are we behind? Oh, we got to get it going now, I guess. I mean, it is objectively such a problem because first of all, it's a problem regardless of what team you are. You should not be getting off to slow start after slow start after slow start. However, of all the losses that we've taken this season, right, if you go back and say how many of them have we led at halftime, I want to say BYU might have been the only one where it's like, man, we had it, we let them off the hook, we let it slip away, yada, yada, yada. Every other game that we've lost so far this season, and correct me if I'm wrong, Grayson, we have been trailing at halftime. And so to me, that spells out what you need to do, how things need to be done right there. Because again, you are not good enough. You are not talented enough as a team to continue to, we're going to wake up sometime in the middle of the second half. No, you need to come alive at tip-off. Because if not, we'll see what we saw in terms of all of these games where time after time again, it's, oh, man, they fought back so hard. They fought so valiantly, but they lost. Imagine if you put that same fight up at the end of the game, but you also sprinkle some of it on the beginning. Do it like the IG chefs do with parsley. Put it over everything. Put that energy and effort over everything, and you'll be just fine.
Actually, I know we were leading at half this past Saturday in Winston, ended up losing that one. If my memory serves correctly, I think the other one, I think there is only 2. It was against BYU earlier in the season that you mentioned.
Yeah.
All the other ones, I believe that we were losing at half. So more than often, if NC State's going to lose a basketball game, you're going to know by whatever that halftime score is. And it speaks to a great point. And sure, we obviously know that other teams, they try too. They're also trying to win basketball games. And so other teams get off to a great start. You have to accredit them for that. But in some of these slow starts for NC State, it just feels extremely self-inflicted every single time. And that's what makes this a bigger point is they just look sluggish or they're turning the ball over. They're rushing horrible shots. They're not getting up and down the floor. They're getting back cut. It's just seemingly one thing after the next. So I think that's a lot of times you can tell pretty early on how that rest of the game will go based on how bad they want it out of the gate.
Yeah, and it's so disappointing because, again, if you're not talented enough to kind of have those slow starts and kind of, we'll figure it out. We'll get there when we get there. You need to be coming out the gates early, fast, getting it moving, getting it going. But even beyond that, the question is, what is the adjustment? How do we make that adjustment to come out faster, to come out hotter? What are teams throwing at us that consistently we find ourselves in a hole at halftime?
You can mask a lot of that with attitude, aggressiveness, and hustle. And it sounds like every coach that you've ever had in your life hammering home the same 3 points. But they say it because it's true. You can mask a lot of deficiencies in your team by just overbearing your opponent. My second point is kind of the struggles with an effective rotation. And unfortunately, we're sitting here in mid-February and we're still dealing with it. And I remember a reporter asked Coach Keats early in this season, and they basically said, do you think you have basically too many players that can play? And I think everyone kind of chuckled at it at the time. But I mean, there might be a little bit of truth to that. You look at trying to determine 8 to 9 guys that can all give you valuable minutes. And seemingly just can't find the correct lineup that you get the most out of the 5 that are on the floor. And I've already mentioned, MJ Rice decides to redshirt. Cam Woods, at this point, you don't really know what you look at other guys like Casey Marcel trying to generate more offense than maybe he's accustomed to. And instead of just being a catch and shoot type guy, seems out of his comfort zone. And based on the other personnel that was on the court, it's really all he had left to do. And so Michael O'Connell has been kind of a guy that's really come on strong, at least in the middle part of the season, starting to orchestrate more things. And you saw right off the bat how that can help a team like this when they struggle so much with finding the correct rotations that can get the most offense, get the most defense at the same time. And it just felt like such a push and pull when maybe this is your best defensive set, but you're generating next to nothing offensively. So you switch one guy out and that kind of all goes by the wayside. And now you can't play effective enough defense to generate more offense. And you get what I'm saying here. So you're not having enough guys like LJ Thomas, who I do think probably deserves more minutes at this point in the season. I know we saw Ernest Ross in Winston on Saturday. I don't know how much he could have changed what's going on, but it's just they're still trying to do this. And at that point, the ship has sailed at this point in the season. So it's tough to stomach there. Your third point, Kenton, we'll go ahead and wrap up our 3 points. Give me your third point.
My third point is lack of ISO scoring. Coach Keats is at his best. Coach Keats coaches offenses, and I know that people like to say, hey, there's no offense here, but the premise of the offense is to force switches, and when you force the switch, you're going to have a mismatch somewhere. That's what they did when there was Al Freeman and Yurt, and Torrin Dorn was a player on this team and not a coach. That's what those 3 did. They found those switches, and all 3 of them were good at executing on them. Yurt was going to give you some post moves. He was going to figure out how to work something down low. Torrin Dorn was a mid-range master. When he got you into that one-on-one ISO, you and him, he was good at finishing at the rim. But boy, that mid-range, it was Rip Hamilton level, because it was just like it was a bucket every time. Al Freeman, sharpshooter, specialist out there, and he could do that as well as handle the ball a little bit there. But that the shooting is the main thing there. All 3 of those guys, the main scorers, had defined roles, but they were good in ISO as well. Right now we have DJ Horn, who's good at ISO. If you were to look at this team, who else would you say is good at ISO? Because last year we had DJ Burns in the post, hibachi. Those defenders chopped up, throw a little sauce on there, make the Flames dance a little, because that's what DJ Burns would do when he hit that spin move on you. You're in the blender, baby. That's just what it is. And then you had Terquavion Smith, who's now lighting it up in the NBA, the association, ladies, gentlemen, and friends. And then you've got Jarkel Joyner, who 3-level scorer. You don't know where it's coming from. This guy may be a little sawed off, but I'll tell you what, he can finish at the rim. His mid-range is money. From deep, he can get it done too. So this year, I can name you one guy that if you told me, Ken, this guy has to go get you a bucket, your rent money's on the line. Obviously, don't go on FanDuel with your rent money, okay? But this guy's got to get you a bucket. Your rent is on the line. Your car note's on the line. I feel comfortable saying I won't be walking and my stuff won't be on the street next week because DJ will get me a bucket. I don't feel comfortable with anybody else saying that at this point in time.
Coming into this season, we discussed after the end of last season and, throughout the preseason before this one, we knew what needed to be replaced coming off of a tournament team, because you would have to find a way to, in a sense, recreate Baby T and Jarkel, and you'd have to find a way to generate that offense, because you're not looking at guys like Kenton mentioned. You can just roll the ball out and say, hey, I need you right now. Go get us a couple buckets. And, we attacked the portal. We brought in 6 or 7 new faces, and sure, that was all fine on paper, but as we've seen now, they just haven't quite panned out. And it speaks to several of these points. Like I mentioned, they're all kind of interconnected. So my third point, which is also connected, getting poor play in the paint. And you talked about DJ Burns is not quite the same DJ Burns that we got last year. Maybe that's some confidence. Maybe just it's a bounce. here or there. A lot of it can be scouting report. Teams now kind of know what he is. That's all in the same bucket, so to speak. And Mo Diarra, I think he's a very unfinished product still. I think there's still plenty of upside in terms of rim protection and rebounding. The offensive side of Mo Diarra is still unrefined. And every now and then you'll see a flash of him getting to the rim or being a force inside. The three-point shooting at times is nice, and it was, I guess, nice to see him hit 2 of those at Wake, but it's not consistent enough that you can be able to rely on that on night in and night out. So
it's not a weapon that you should be able to count on, or that you can be able to count on going to, like, hey, every night, book it. Mo for 2 threes. That's,
Yeah, it's nice, but you can't rely on that in a
it's the exception, not the rule. It's the exception, not the rule. Yeah.
That's been something to deal with the entirety of the season. And then Ben Middlebrooks as well. I think he provides a lot of energy that you might lack in other areas, but he struggled to finish around the rim at some points. He struggled to defend at some points. I don't know. He's kind of just like a dog chasing a car in a sense. He's out there and he can get a lot of things done, but sometimes it's not as efficient as you need it to be. And so you compile all of that and you just have a lot of inconsistency down in the paint. And of course, like we mentioned, it's kind of been everywhere. And that has been much of the issue. But those were our top 3 things for each of us on why this team has struggled. I guess all 3 of these points for each of us can fall under the umbrella in some sense of coaching. I'm sure people have waited for us to say, well, the main problem is Keats. And I think Keats does get a lot of the criticism that he deserves. I think he gets a lot of unwarranted criticism as well. I think some of it has to be execution. And I understand when you've made up your mind on a coach, that's how you see it. And I totally get that. I'm not discrediting that. I understand where that comes from, but I think he is a little bit unfairly criticized because if the players cannot produce, the players don't produce. Sometimes that is what it is. And so those are our top 3 things on how this men's basketball team has found themselves where they currently find themselves. In just a minute, we're going to tie a bow on this discussion after a quick word from our sponsor. Our second sponsor of Tuesday is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. That's because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Tying a bow on this discussion, our last couple minutes of Tuesday here. It's a tough pill to swallow. And, we discussed coming into this season how you really felt like the aspirations for this team needed to be get back to the dance and then maybe take another step, maybe win a game, maybe 2 games. And it's hard to stomach that seemingly with all of this talent on paper, it's just something seems to go wrong everywhere. Well, I shouldn't say everywhere you look, but it's something different every single night, which is what we've already discussed here. But now we want to hear from you. So in the comments, give us your top 3 things about why this men's basketball team has struggled so much up to this point. Tell us why you think it is what it is. We love this sort of thing where we can interact with people because we find it fascinating how other people think. Give us your top 3 things on why this men's basketball team has struggled so far.
For sure. And y'all know our rules. We're fine with critiquing players. We're fine with critiquing coaches, just keeping in bounds. And we're good to go from there, right? If you feel like Coach Keats is as reckless as a coach as they come, please feel free. You can say that. You will not get any objection from us. If you can point out and support your argument, hey, that's all right with us.
That'll do it for us here on Tuesday. As always, be sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments, like I just mentioned, in the comment box. Let us know what you think. And as always, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, or tell a friend to tell a friend, as we're still inching toward that 1,400 then on to 1,500 mark. Thank you all so very much for their support. We will see you all tomorrow. Until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.